I managed to read 50 books this year, so let's get into those and see what I read in 2025. 8 of the books I read this year were by Julia Quinn. She writes historic romance novels. She's one of my favorite authors, and these were the last from her that I still needed to read. I read 4 books by H.D. Colton, which was The Haunting and Hunting Adeline duology, along with The Satan's Affair, which came as part of the set, and then also Shadow River, which was a very interesting dark romance, which I don't really think had so much romance as what it was dark and twisty. But those were from H.D. Colton. I read Al Kennedy's Briar U series, so that was 4 books. I read 2 books by Nevessa Allen, being Lights Out and Caught Up. I will be continuing this series as she releases them next year. I read 2 books by Hannah Grace, being Daydream and Wildfire. I read 4 books by Penelope Douglas. I completed the Corrupt series, I completed the Fall Away series, and then I read the first book from Falls Boys. I do still need to read the second book in this duology, and I will do so in the new year. I read 5 books by Emily Rath. This is the Jacksonville Rays series, and I will be continuing this series in the new year as she continues to release the rest of them. I read 2 books by Anna Hung, which were The Striker and The Defender. I will also be continuing this series in the new year as she continues to release more. I read 2 books by Danielle Laurie, being The Maddest Obsession and The Sweetest Oblivion. I have 1 more book from this trilogy, which I will continue to read next year. I read the first 3 books in the Chestnut Spring series by Elsie Silver, which is Flawless, Heartless, and Powerless. I will read the next 2 books in the new year. I read Older by Jennifer Hartman. She was a new author to me, and I do like her writing style. You guys have suggested some more books from her that I might consider checking out in the new year. I read Ice Planet Barbarians by Ruby Dixon. This is the first book in the series. The second book might kind of sort of be in a box on its way here from a warehouse somewhere for us to read next year. I really would love to continue this entire series. There are a ton of books in it, so maybe we'll do so in the new year. I read Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. This was the only classic novel I read this year. I dipped my toes into Rena Kent by reading God of Malice. I plan to continue her entire universe in the new year, but this is the only one I read in 2025. The last romance book I read this year I do not have in my hand because a friend still has my copy, which she needs to read. The last romance book I read was by Jo Watson. It is What Happens on Vacation. From there I move over into romantasy, with the first one in that genre being Kiss of the Basilisk by Lindsay Struber. I don't know, never heard of the author, but as wild as this book was, I had a fantastic time with it, and I definitely have book 2 on its way. I will be reading that in the new year. I also read Silver Elite by Dani Francis. This was an entertaining book, and I will consider continuing the series if more of it gets released throughout the next year. Next, I read Quicksilver by Callie Hart. I will definitely be reading book 2. I was dying to read it this year. I do have it on my shelf. I just didn't quite make it there, so it will be read in 2026. I read Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, and I will be continuing this series as she releases them next year. I read Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. Now, I am reading the series and it is good. I just don't love it as much as all of you do. However, I will be continuing the rest of the books in 2026. I read Skyshade by Alex Astor. Now, I do have 2 more books from her that I still need to read, and I will do so next year. I read The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black. She's one of the authors I enjoy reading for like fantasy novels, and I do have I think 1 or 2 more of hers on my shelf which we might continue in the next year. Lastly, I read Not Quite Dead Yet by Holly Jackson. This was her first adult mystery novel. I do think she is better as a YA, and I probably would have left this book categorized as such, but it was a good book to read nonetheless. And that is it. That is 50 books for 2025. And I definitely am pretty impressed with what I managed to read this year. I think it was a really good reading year. I really enjoyed the books I read. What were your opinions on these, and how many of them have you read?